this will be recorded on the Tube of You for those of you that want to go back and watch this or listen to it. And then also on TikTok Live over here on this camera. So I'm going to spend most of my time focusing this way on the YouTube audience. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. So if this is your first time joining us, this is a monthly Q&A live for the garden, for the food forest, for homesteads, for permaculturists. So if you have questions, you are welcome to add those into the chat. So the way that this will work is over the next about 45 minutes, I'll go through a list of questions that have been sent first by our Patreon members. So those are monthly patrons that we have a community together, patreon.com/permaculturefx, where we offer classes and workshops and PDFs and homestead training. It's really our way of being able to mentor people in the permaculture and homesteading world. So not just providing you with a plan for your homestead or for your property, but allowing us to be able to mentor you in that process. So we're going to take the Patreon member questions first. So before we get into the April Q&A live, what I like to do every month is start off with just sharing my top 3 things that you should be doing this month in your garden, in your food forest, and on your homestead. So obviously knowing that people are tuning in from a lot of different time zones, I wanna make sure that we kind of divide this in half. The way that I like to do this is typically we do zones 3 through 8 first, and then USDA growing zones 9 through 11. So let's go ahead and start with zones 3 through 8. So the things that I think that you should be kind of doing in your garden, now these are just my personal recommendations. I grew up in Michigan. I spent almost 17 years in Kansas City, Missouri. So I really love the Midwest. My heart has been there for a very, very long time. The last 5 or so years, I have been here in Central Florida, which is USDA growing zone 9B where I'm at. So for me, those things in USDA 3 through 8, you guys are finally just starting to wake up. The major danger, I didn't mean that to rhyme, but the major danger of frost and snow is almost past. Now, don't get me wrong, like 10 years ago or so, I remember being in Kansas City, and on May 5th, we got a snowstorm. I mean, it was like 5 inches of snow. It was 5 inches of snow gone in 2 days, but that's still a lot of snow. So if you are in the Midwest, I like to take it slow, go in phases, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And that is a really good piece of grandma, grandpa advice, the eggs in a basket thing. I know this personally because today I had all of my eggs in one basket, came into the house and was kind of puttering around, talking on the phone with my friend Rebecca, and all of a sudden dropped the entire basket. All of the eggs broken all over the floor. And she was like, "Didn't you listen to your grandma? Don't put all your eggs in one basket." And I'm like, I get it. I get it. The same is true with your plants, especially those USDA zones 3 through 8, because if you do get a frost, you don't want to kill everything that you put into your garden because you put it in a little bit too soon. So for most of you in that USDA growing zone, it's veggie season go time. So you are thinking brassicas, beets, chards, kales, lettuces, snow peas, all of those things are great to go in the ground right now. So you can go ahead and put all of those in. And most of those can really handle a light frost, even a light snow. So I wouldn't be worried at all in USDA zones 3 through 8 about putting any of those brassicas into the ground right now with absolute confidence. Now, when it comes to nightshades, so think tomatoes, think peppers, think eggplants, those I would ease into the ground for a couple reasons. Now, one, you don't want to risk putting all your tomato plants in and then you get a frost and you have no tomato seedlings and you have to spend $5 a piece at some stupid big box store for varieties that you don't even want. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is you don't need bushels and bushels of tomatoes all ripe, all at the same time. So I like to stagger my plantings, put a few in every week. So that way you've kind of staggered the growth, you've staggered your investment. So you've got your insurance policies still inside. So you'd be a little bit happier in that world. So thing number 1 for USDA zones 3 through 8 is go ahead and start those annual vegetables in the garden. Number two, second thing that I would be doing right now in the garden, if you are in USDA growing zones 3 through 8, is compost, compost, compost. You are starting to wake up your plants, which means they need more nitrogen. Nitrogen is what's going to bring up that green growth on the plants. You don't want to be doing a lot of those middle two numbers, the phosphorus or the potassium right now. You want to focus on that nitrogen level. So do a lot of compost and blood meal probably toward the end of the month. So I would wait just a little bit to do the blood meal. That's going to give you a nice flush of nitrogen for your plants to produce some good new green growth. Now, fruit trees and berry bushes, I would go ahead and put your blood meal on now. Let that slowly start to soak into the soil. It takes a little bit longer for the uptake on the fruit trees and berry bushes before you start seeing that effect. So if you want to see the bone meal and blood meal working by the end of the month or the 1st of May, go ahead and apply that now on your fruit trees and on your berry bushes. And then tip number 3 for USDA growing zones 3 through 8, planting your fruit trees now. However, do it before they fruit and before they flower. I know it's so tempting to buy that fruit tree when it's in full flower at the greenhouse. It's beautiful. It's pretty. I mean, it's gorgeous, putting on a show for you. That is not a good time to put that plant in the ground. All the energy is going to those blooms to keep them alive and to keep those blooms thriving. So the energy is not going to be going to establish a healthy root system, which is where you want that energy to be going. So I like to wait. I like to try and get them in before any blooms open up. If it's already bloomed and you've already got some fruit set, what I would do is pick off any of the fruit that's on there because you don't want a fruit tree or berry bush producing year one. Give it a slight trim. I'm talking like just snip the tips, just the very edges of them, 1 or 2 inches off the top, go down to the first node just to take off the stress of that plant, put the energy into establishing roots. Remember, year one that you put in fruit trees and berry bushes, this is the time that plant needs to be establishing a good, healthy root system. If you leave one fruit on the tree, that tree thinks the whole thing is full of fruit, and so it totally changes the nutrient requirements of that fruit tree and of that berry bush. So make sure that you allow all of that energy year one to be going to the root system. So again, for USDA zones 3 through 8, number 1, it's your veggie go time. Number 2, compost now and do blood meal from now until the end of the month. And then number 3, get those fruit trees and berry bushes in the ground. You want to give them as long as you can to get established before, I hate to say it, before the winter comes. So those of you in zones 9 through 11, so you're in more subtropical, tropical, or desert climates. So the things that I would be focusing on for you guys right now, number 1, first and foremost, eat and enjoy the spring fruit. I don't know about you guys, but I am obsessed with mulberries and loquats. I mean, I could literally eat those things until they are dripping down my beard. The mulberries this year have been fantastic. The mulberry trees have really been producing well. The Tice mulberry has done well for me this year. Chiang Mai 60 has done really well. What was the other one that I just ate from? The Dwarfshaw Reza has done really well for me this year. The Everbearing mulberry is always kind of meh to me, but it's been a really good mulberry year. Now, loquats are kind of toward the end of the season, but I am eating as many as I possibly can. So as a master herbalist, I like loquat because it's one of the very few plants that regenerates every cell tissue in the body, from muscles to ligaments to bones. Every cell tissue in the body can be impacted both by the loquat fruit, but also by the loquat leaves. So the loquat leaves, sometimes they call these Japanese plums. Those were worth their weight in gold, literally, during the Tang Dynasty in China because of the value of the antioxidants. So you can take the young leaves when they still have that fuzz all over the leaves and steep it in hot water like you would do any type of a tea. It has the flavor of a green tea. It actually gets a reddish tint to it sometimes, but there's no caffeine. So you get all of those wonderful antioxidant properties, but there's no caffeine in it, and it's going to help with a lot of good cellular regeneration. So the second thing, if you are in USDA zones 9 through 11, this is a great time of year to start air layering. So if you're looking at propagating plants, springtime is when the sap really is going to start flowing through the vines and through the branches. So that's a great time to do some air layering. So if you're wondering how you do that, if you are on Patreon, I did post a video tutorial of how you do a real simple air layering. It's about a 10 or 15 minute video, zooms in really close. So you can see that. So if you are on Patreon, that was earlier this week. If you are interested in Patreon, there's a link for that in the bio. So other things that you can be air layering or taking cuttings from: mulberries, figs, avocados, mangoes. So all of those are great to either do air layering, or some of those like fig and mulberry are great to do cutting. So literally today I went for a walk, and as I was walking, I was cutting some mulberry cuttings, and I put in a super berry in one pocket, and I had a turkey mulberry in the other pocket, and I can't remember. It was a gelato mulberry in my back pocket. So I was writing down on my phone, like, gelato mulberry, back left pocket, because I want to go back and be propagating these as much as possible this time of year. Now, granted, with mulberry, you can kind of do it whenever you want, but spring is such a good time to do that. So first thing, again, was to eat and enjoy the fruit. And obviously you want to save those seeds. Second thing, start some air layering and propagating. And the third thing is, this is the time of year in USDA zones 9 through 11 to order your pasture seed and or your cover crops. So this is like sun hemp or field pea, cow pea, jack bean, whatever you're using for cover crops, for chop and drop. This is when you want to get that ordered, because most of those are either going in now or they're going in the 1st of May. So for me personally, sun hemp is May 1 until about August 1 or August 15th. So this is the time of year to get those ordered, especially sun hemp. I get mine from Hancock Seed Company. I do not get a kickback from them. That's just where I personally order my seed from. Hancock Seed Company has a great sun hemp. That is a bean pea or in the legume family, Fabaceae. And it will grow anywhere nationwide. My parents grew it up in Michigan last year as a deer food plot cover crop. Works great. Now here in Florida, if you are in zones 8, 9, 9B, it'll flower, but you're not going to get it to self-seed. Now, it can self-seed if you're in like 9B, 10, or 11. It can self-seed. It's not super common, but it could happen. But this is definitely the time of year you want to buy that sun hemp, buy your cover crop, get that available so you're ready to get that in the ground as soon as possible. So those are the 3 things for USDA zones 9 through 11. I want to jump in and start taking some of the questions from the Patreon crew. I'm going to get a drink of water quick. Got to stay hydrated. So, fun topics for today. So the first question that was asked in Patreon: can you share recipes for tropical spinaches? So the easy answer to that question, yes, I can share some recipes or ideas of how to use them. If you're in the Patreon group, there is a separate PDF that you can search for that gives you a list of my favorite tropical spinaches and then how to use them with 4 or 5 different recipes. But in general, you can use tropical spinaches in any way that you typically would a regular spinach. Now, the general rule of thumb is most tropical spinaches are not going to be as good fresh in a salad, unfortunately. They're better cooked, soups, stews, sauteed, using it in side dishes. So for example, the other day I had my family was visiting from Michigan, and I decided to do this like fondue pot, and I did it tropical spinach style. So I took Suriname spinach, longevity spinach, Okinawa spinach, chopped it up really fine, diced up some tomatoes, put them in, lots of moringa powder, mix that all together, put it on the fondue pot until those tropical spinach leaves just wilted. And it was this awesome spinach cheese dip fondue. I made some sourdough bread, and we just sat there for about an hour and just ate. We're not going to talk about the copious amount of sourdough bread that I ate, but I was pretty impressed with myself. I think I actually polished off a half a loaf of bread by myself, which is ridiculous. But ain't nobody judging, and if you are judging, get out of here. You don't belong here. So you can use it as a fondue, as a queso dip, other uses for tropical spinaches, and scrambled eggs. So when you're doing your scrambled eggs in the morning, chop up those tropical spinaches, add them in. Now, especially those of you that love eggs, but you have blood cholesterol level problems, high DHL cholesterol or whatever, longevity spinach can help normalize blood cholesterol levels. Now, it's not going to higher or lower those levels, but it brings it back into homeostasis. Now, obviously, if you are on blood thinners, Coumadin, Warfarin, or any other heart medications, please talk to your family care physician before adding anything into your diet. The purpose of this is not to diagnose you, but to recommend something that you could add into your diet that may have health benefits for you. So add that longevity spinach into your eggs, and then you can enjoy your eggs, and it may help with some of those blood cholesterol levels. Now you can saute the greens as well. Think like collard green style, so more on the savory, add in some bacon, a little splash of vinegar, salt, pepper, and garlic. Or if you like that really savory side, what I love to do, saute the greens, salt, pepper, garlic, a little splash of white wine, and then at the very end, Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese fixes freaking everything. I mean, literally everything. You think duct tape works? Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese. That will fix all of your problems. And wine. That also helps. So second question. So after the tropical spinaches is, how do you use poopy hay? That was the literal phrase in the chat, and I just love that. How do you use poopy hay? So whether we're talking about sheep, goats, llamas, alpacas, cattle, horses, donkeys, lions, tigers, bears, oh my, whatever. How do you use straw that has manure that's mixed up in it? Now, the general rule of thumb is I don't want to use manure when it's fresh on any green that is directly going in my mouth. So I'm not going to be using this on salad greens, on tomatoes, on things that are going through my mouth. I'm going to use most of that manure on something that is a hard-stemmed plant, because the cellular walls of that hard stem, the branch, and the trunk will help filter that manure and any of the potential bacteria from getting into the plant itself. Number two, those taller plants, berry bushes, fruit trees, that sort of thing, the fruit of those that you're eating is off the ground, so you're not going to have to worry as much about E. coli, Salmonella, H. pylori. So those are going to be your three most common things that can cause problems when using manure. Now, the other thing to think about and consider if you're using hay or straw that has manure in it is you don't want it to be too hot. So when manure decomposes, it has about a 15-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. So what that means is for every one cow pie that you have, you need 15 other equal parts that are going to be carbon-based. So leaves or straw, something like that. Hey, Beth, good to see you in TikTok. This is actually my friend David's house, so I'm not at my house tonight, but it's so good to see you. I would definitely just be aware that you are using manure when it's cooled down. If in doubt, let it sit for a couple months, turn the pile, rotate it, stick in a compost thermometer, and you want it to be cooled off. Now, compost can get hot, both in the amount of ammonia, so chemically hot, but also temperature hot. When compost is processing, it can be 120, 135 degrees, which is good because at that 135 degree mark, that's where you're killing off bacteria and disease. And that's true in a human context as well, which is why it's great to go in a sauna, far infrared sauna when you're sick, because 135 is what's killing off bacteria and viruses and diseases and that sort of thing. So that's what I would probably keep in mind if you're using straw that has manure in it. I do take it out directly into the food forest, but never directly on plants that are younger and more sensitive, never directly on bananas because they can burn a little bit easier. If you're worried about it and you want to put it on your bananas, stack 6 inches of straw first and then the manure on top, so that way it can kind of filter it out just a little bit as it kind of decomposes. So there's the answer to that question. Question number 3, when ordering straw or hay, what are the dangers of Grazon, and should I be worried about that in my hay? Grazon, unfortunately, is pretty much everywhere these days. If you're buying hay and it's not from an organic farmer, I can almost guarantee you it's going to have Grazon in it. Then the downside is it will impact your annual vegetables pretty significantly. So you've just got to keep that in mind if you're using hay or straw on your annual vegetable beds. It stinks, but that is the modern agricultural world that we're in. The alternative to that is grow your own chop and drop, whether that is switchgrass, vetiver, Napier grass, elephant grass, tiger grass, Mexican sunflower, I think I already said that, daisy tree, any of those, moringa, those can be used as a great chop and drop. If you are in the northern climates, things like autumn olive. I know it's invasive, but it's a great nitrogen fixer. So it's a great one for chop and drop. You don't want to chop and drop it when the berries are on there because then, beloved, you're planting autumn olive, but you get the idea. So, that's the Grazon question. How do you deal with Grazon once it's in there? Hey, Josh, how are you? Hopefully Kansas City's going well for you. So the Grazon, because it is going to be in your hay and your straw when you buy it, there are a couple ways that you can go about treating the Grazon so you don't have to worry as much about the impact on your ecosystem. So method number one is going to be bacterial. Method number two is the fungal approach. So if you're going the bacterial approach, you want to use a lot of different probiotics or indigenous microorganisms. So you can either grow those using methods like JDAM or Korean natural farming. That's a great way to utilize that bacteria. My personal preference, because I don't always have time to do that, is I'll often use BioAg from SCD Probiotics, actually based out of Kansas City, Missouri. There is a link for that probiotic blend in my bio. So if you are looking for that, you can click there. So that's the bacterial approach to purifying Grazon and getting rid of impurities in your compost. The second methodology is to approach it fungally. So you're using mycorrhizal fungi, mushrooms, basically, to eat up all of that bad stuff. So Dr. Paul Stamets has a couple really good TED Talks of, I think it's like 10 ways mushrooms are saving the world. And that's a really great approach, even to using mushrooms for toxic waste, oil spills, bioremediation. So mushrooms have an incredible ability to just eat up all of that that's in our compost or in our system. So for those of you even that are trying to garden in an HOA where they've sprayed your yard with chemicals, with fertilizers, the fungal approach is a great way to do that. Earthright, RITE, has a product called Mushroom Stuff that you can actually attach onto your hose, spray that around your yard, and that can really help and be beneficial. The other way to help with the Grazon issue is to bind it up somehow using something like biochar. So that would be another way to be able to use it. But technically, if you're doing biochar, I guess that would actually be a bacterial approach because the biochar is housing the bacteria and they're actually binding up the Grazon, but that's a nerdy chemistry conversation. So question number 4. Can you grow things directly on poopy hay? I would say just see previous answer. Yes, you can do fruit trees, berry bushes, that sort of thing. But again, if you're growing in that hay, I don't want to be growing something that's going directly in my mouth if it has not had time to process through that bacteria, because then you are running a risk of E. coli, salmonella, and H. pylori bacterial infection. So that is a very real thing and very dangerous. Question number 5, using sheep wool in compost. Heck yeah, absolutely. We used to use sheep wool, alpaca wool, llama wool. All of that goes in compost. I put in dog hair when I go to get my little hair trim, once a year. I always ask them for the hair clippings of myself and whatever's in their basket. Beard trimmings, all of that goes into my worm bin or into my compost pile. So absolutely, it does take a while to break down. The proteins in hair and nails and bone do take a long time to break down, but it's fantastic. It can also be a good rodent repellent as well. So it's and deer repellent. So it's something to consider as well. Number 6, where to buy bulk compost. A lot of that is going to depend on where you're from. And honestly, I can't remember who asked that question. So if you're in Patreon and you asked me that question, I will have to get back to you on someplace local. A couple places that I really like. Who is the permaculture guy at the Lake County meeting that brought the compost? Was it James? James Bender? I think James Bender from Lake County Permaculture had some. You could also ask David Scallion, possibly. The other places that I get it, if you're in Ocala, Ocala Organics has it for about 25 a cubic yard. And then what's the other one that's in Groveland? Is gotta remember, I did lose power there. Is it on your screen? We're gonna be right back. Oh, the audio's still going? Okay, so if you are listening and you don't see anything, just keep listening for just a minute. And then in Groveland, Okahumpka is Reliable Peat was the other one. And I believe theirs was $22.50 per cubic yard was their cost on the compost. So that's the answer to that question. So question number 7 is, what is the fastest growing chop and drop for zone 10A? Do you want to pause so you can reboot that camera? Okay. Okay. So if you are looking for chop and drop for zone 10A, and this is a little bit of a difficult question because it depends on, are you in zone 10A in California, Texas, or zone 10A in like Florida? So, and if you're in the subtropical places, I like Mexican sunflower. Daisy tree is really good. Moringa is really good. Napier grass is really good. All of those can be great if you're in that subtropical kind of region and growing zone. If you're in the more desert climates, I would consider things like cassia. Acacia wood is really good. The one downside with acacia is you often have to do acacia when it's still green, because the acacia wood a lot of times will have like thorns and pricklies and stuff on it. So I like to do that when it is more green. So we're going to pause the broadcast. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. So after that little audio visual blip, we're back. Let me get a little sip of water. Technology, it works awesome. Technology, I'm telling you, it's literally like one of those things. All right, so we did fastest chop and drop in zone 10A was the last question. That was number 7. So question number 8, and again, if you are just tuning in, you're welcome to add some questions into the chat, and then we'll get to those after we're done with this list of 13 questions from Patreon. So question number 8, should I worry about disease from rodents in my food forest? If so, how do I deter them? So first, I'm not really worried too much about disease from those animals because they're not like bleeding and urinating on my fruit trees and my berry bushes. Now, there are some rodents like possums or raccoons that will come in. They're going to eat some fruit, but typically speaking, I'm not grabbing a fruit off the ground that a possum has already helped itself to and eating that. So I'm not really worried too much about disease or bacteria. And usually when I'm picking fruit for other people, I'm washing it off first before I serve it. Now myself, I am just eating it right off the tree almost every time. But if you are worried about rodents in your food forest or your garden, there's a couple ways that you can go about getting rid of or deterring those pests. Method number 1 is using plants. Now, the reason why the plant thing works is because of the highly scented polyphenols and the terpenes that are released by that plant, and it masks the scent of the fruit. So it's not just that the smell is repulsive to the animal, but it covers up the smell of your fruit trees, of your berry bushes. So one of my favorites for this USDA zone, USDA zones 9 through 11, I love Panadol. So it's Plectranthus canis Roth. I know that is a mouthful. You can get the Panadol plant from the Reed Farm, R-E-I-D Farm. They do have a website and they'll sell the cuttings on there. And now Panadol grows as a great ground cover, gets about 6 inches tall, has a beautiful purple and blue flower on it, pretty much all year round. The one downside is it smells like cannabis, like straight up like cannabis. So if you're walking through the garden and you've got friends coming over, you are gonna smell like weed. Like that's the one downside with Panadol, but I'll tell you what, it works. I mean, I plant Panadol around a feed shed, chicken food areas, around the fruit trees that the rodents always get in, like avocados. They love getting up in avocado trees. So Panadol pretty much at the base of any of those, great around pools, that sort of thing. So Panadol is probably my go-to, but really anything that's highly scented. So you could use lemongrass, you could use Mexican thyme, you could use oregano, you could use lemon balm, you could use pretty much anything that is highly scented. Spearmints are all going to be really good. Those are going to help repel those rats and mice at least a little bit. Now, the plants are not a 100% guarantee. So like when people think, oh, I'm going to plant citronella around my pool, that's only going to repel mosquitoes when you're rubbing up against the plant. It's not like planting lemongrass or citronella is going to repel all the mosquitoes from around your pool. It might for 3, 4, 5 feet around the plant, but that's about it. It's mainly meant to rub those terpenes on your skin, and that smell is what is going to keep them away. So the second way to deter pests, and I'll keep this short, pew pew, that's it. Third way is by using natural predators. So making places for owl boxes, allowing hawks to be able to be in your system. Now, obviously with chickens, I don't want hawks around my chicken coop, so I'm trying to keep them away from those. But I love when owls and hawks and eagles and those birds of prey are in my food forest and in my system. I allow them as part of the natural ecosystem to be there. I don't like them around my chickens. Stay away from my dang chooks. Otherwise, I like to let them be there. So those are a couple tips on how to deter pests from your garden. Question number 9, and again, you are welcome to go ahead and add in some questions into the live chat there, and we'll get to those at the end. Question number 9, how much bone meal per tree? It depends. Depends on what the source of the bone meal is. So some bone meal has more potential to burn the plants because it's a higher concentration of nitrogen and nitrates than other animal byproducts. So generally speaking, if it's like a beef, scenario, I usually use like on a fruit tree that has a 4 or 5 inch trunk, I'm going to use about 1 cup sprinkled about 3 feet around the tree, maybe 2 cups. But obviously read the back of the directions, follow the directions, because it's all going to depend on what the source of that bone meal is and if it's been diluted. Sometimes they will dilute bone meal with things like feather meal, and that may allow you for a higher concentration that you're adding to your plant. So just check out the directions on the back. Should be good to go. Typically for like small house plants, I use like a teaspoon of the bone meal. And bone meal is going to be high in nitrogen and also in phosphorus. So it's going to help in your green growth stage and also in the flowering and beginning of the fruit cycle. Question number 10. I have a clear gel on my peaches and my nectarines. What is that? Sometimes that gel can start clear and then it may turn a little bit more brown. It's some type of a wound to the tree that it forms a canker. Generally, it's a bacterial or a fungal infection. Now, if you are in the Midwest, zones 3 through 8, this typically comes from cedar trees and it causes apple cedar rust and it causes that canker infection on the tree. Now, pretty much anywhere nationwide, we get something called brown rot that starts as that gel, that wound, that fungal infection on the tree, but then it causes the tree fruit to rot before it's ripe. So if you're getting peaches and nectarines on your tree, they're not quite ripe yet and they start rotting on the end, that is not a calcium deficiency. So it's not like in tomatoes where it's called blossom end rot. It's a fungal disease that is called the brown rot, and that needs to be cured either bacterially or fungally. So what happens is that fungus gets on your tree, usually when the tree is dormant, and if you skipped your spring foliar spray, that fungus will get on the tree, and then when that flower opens up, it infects the flower and infects the young fruit. You don't see the result of it until the fruit gets to the mature stage, and then that fungus starts to suck all of those sugars out of the fruit. So that's where you're seeing it. So if you're treating it fungally, you can use a fungal spray on your tree. If you're doing it bacterially, I use BioAg. So I do 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year. I'll spray it with good probiotics. The other way that you can do this is is with neem spray will help minimally. It is not going to help a lot. The other organic solutions is a foliar spray using kaolin clay or bentonite clay real lightly on the leaves. You don't want to fully cover the leaves because that can prevent photosynthesis. Cover the leaves, wait for a day or two, spray the kaolin clay off, and you could be okay. If you want something a little more dramatic or harsher, you could use a copper or a sulfur spray. Those are available in organic options, but that is a little more of an intense approach if it's gotten really bad. But I will warn you, the brown rot is a little more challenging to get rid of. You're going to have to stay on your foliar sprays. And I'm talking, if you're in Florida experiencing this, probably once a month during the growing season for 1 year. It's a doozy to get rid of that. So number 11, how to acidify soil. So the easiest way to acidify soil is organic sulfur. That's going to be the fastest, easiest way to do that. You can do it using coffee grounds, but that can really raise it quickly at first and then nothing, literally nothing. The other downside to coffee grounds, worms don't love coffee grounds. They can be a little bit sharp on the skin of the worms. So you're risking that a little bit. Now, if you're diluting it, it's not really going to cause that big of an issue. The other way to acidify soil is green, stressing the color, pine needles. Brown or dried pine will not affect the pH of the soil. That's a gardening myth. Let me say it again. Dried pine needles will not affect the pH of your soil at all. It needs to be green. So once that green, goes away, the pH adjustment is going to be ending. So you can chop and drop, white pine or longleaf pine. That's a really easy way to do it, or bury those under your wood chips. Cut a couple branches of that green pine, bury it under the wood chips, and you're G to G, good to go. Question number 12. Is it okay to prune branches that touch the ground on trees like Java plums, strawberry tree, or peanut butter fruit? Heckin' yeah. And you don't really have to wait until those trees are dormant. They're pretty strong, pretty resilient. They can be pruned pretty much any time. And yeah, I like to prune those when they're touching the ground because I don't want the rodents being attracted to it. But if you're just going to cut them, why not air layer? You might as well try and grow a cutting from it. So if it's like, Java plum, strawberry tree, peanut butter fruit, peanut butter fruit you can do from a cutting, but definitely all three of those, air layer the heck out of them. Do you know, David, can you do strawberry tree from a cutting? I've never tried it.
I don't think it likes it because it dries
Okay.
out real bad.
Okay. So air layer.
You might be able to, but I don't think your success is going to be very high.
Yeah.
But I think the air layer really.
I would air layer it. Air layering's easy. It takes like 8 to 10 weeks. And again, for the tutorial on air layering, check out the link in Patreon. So there's a mini class for those. Question number 13, and then you can enter a couple of questions in the chat if there's any, and we'll get to those. Question 13, how do you deal with cover crops at the end of the season? My preference to deal with cover crops at the end of the season, animals. Feed it to them. They're going to compost it immediately. So you're benefiting your animals' health because they're getting a high protein, they're getting digestible and soluble fibers and nutrients. And then they're literally composting it and dropping it in the ground right where it's needed, right where it's wanted. And then you're great to let it decompose there. Or you can do a light drag over the top, break it up, add it to your soil immediately. First time it rains, your plants are going to be uptaking it right away. The other way to do that is chop and drop. If you don't want to literally chop and drop every plant, just mow it. Just mow it. And you can bag it and then bring it somewhere like around a banana or around a peach or an apple or a plum or nectarine, whatever. You can bring that cover crop to a specific area, or you can mow it right where it is. And what I like to do is mow it once, down about halfway, wait for a week, go the other direction. So I'll go one way one time, I'll go the other way the next time, and then the next week, so week 3, I'm going to go back again and almost scalp it. So I'm like really grinding that up really, really good. I don't want it to be a thatch on top of the ground to where it's like preventing the water from going in. So I want to chop it up as the best that I possibly can. So chop and drop it or till it in, and that's pretty much it. So those are the 13 questions from the Patreon crew. Were there any online? 2 questions in the chat. Okay.
All right. Oh, that's really loud. For loquat leaves and tea, can I dry the leaves so I can have the tea for later as well? How do I prepare the tea fresh and or dry leaves, especially for the benefits that you've mentioned?
Oh, nice. Yeah, loquat leaves, you can do them fresh or dried. The younger leaves are going to be tastier. The older leaves, when they get smoother, I feel like they're much more astringent. So the tea is a lot more bitter. So I like to use the fresh leaves when they're younger, about 2 inches long, and then that's pretty much it. Obviously, you don't want to harvest every young leaf because then you're taking all of the fresh green growth. You can do those fresh into hot water, let it steep for 3 to 5 minutes, and then remove the leaves and drink. The longer you steep it, like a green tea, it will get more bitter. You get a little more health benefits, but it is going to be much more bitter. And then, yeah, you can add honey to it if you want. But it will get like a reddish kind of tint to it as you steep it. Hot water, not boiling. Let it steep. And I always leave it covered so that way the water droplets and those nutrients go back down in and they're not evaporating up into the air. So yeah, you're not going to lose a lot of the antioxidant benefits and the cellular regenerative benefits if you dry them. The only downside is you lose some of the enzymatic action that's going to be from the live plant material itself. But if you're wanting the other health benefits and the polyphenols, the antioxidants, the cellular regeneration, fresh or dried won't matter.
All right. Hey, I finally made it to live.
Nice. Who's that?
Jane. Butcher the name.
Okay.
Janie.
Okay.
Janie.
Oh, Janine. Maybe Janine Davy. Yeah.
Yes, Janine Davy. Apologies. If my avocado trees should have been 60 feet apart, but I planted them 20 feet apart, what should you suggest? Should I leave them or move some?
You're going to be pruning a lot. Now, to be honest, avocados, I don't like them to really be full grown. Now, an avocado, pretty much 95% of avocado trees, they're going to get to be 40 to 60 feet tall in 20 years. Who's climbing a 20-foot tall tree to get avocados? Not this guy. I mean, I'm not. So avocado trees, for me personally, I like to take the pole saw, cut them off at about 10 or 12 feet every single year, and just let them get big and bushy. Now, on a tree that is about 5 years old, when you're cutting them off at that height, I get between 150 and 250 avocados per year per tree. That's a lot of avocados from those 10, 12-foot tall trees. So don't think that you're really lessening your fruiting. You're making that fruit far more accessible to you where you can just grab it and go. So I would say 20 feet is going to be tight. I wouldn't be doing a lot of berry bushes and stuff in between. At 20 feet apart, I would probably do one nitrogen fixing plant in between those, like Mexican sunflower or a winter cassia, Christmas cassia, and probably call it a day, or a ground cover, or one bush in the middle in between those two trees, and then do a nitrogen fixing ground cover. So you could do perennial peanut. You could do sunshine mimosa. You could do different kinds of beans that are going to be kind of a ground cover bean. So that would be your other option. But I would definitely just cut them. But I wouldn't be sad that you planted them 20 feet apart. I would recommend doing them 25 feet apart in most cases and then just cutting them off. What about your thoughts, David?
I mean, yeah. I mean, when the avocado trees get really big, it's hard to pick the fruit. Yeah. So if it's close to your house, then I would just keep them close together and you just keep them pruned back so you can reach everything. If it's some property where it's in a corner somewhere, then it might be a problem because you're never going to go out there and prune them. But
right.
If it's some place that is somewhat close to the house and manageable, then yeah.
Keep it small. Nice. One more.
Aside from sweet potatoes, are there any cover crops you recommend for summer, specifically for annual raised beds? Garden beds. We have too many beds and too many sweet potatoes, too much to harvest in the fall.
Yeah, sweet potatoes can be a great cover crop. They're also a lot of work, like digging them up, like your hands and nails are just tanked for like a month. I love sweet potatoes in very small quantities and spaces. They can just be a little aggressive, but I do love them. And I love the greens. The chickens love the greens. The cows love the greens. The horses love the greens. Everybody loves the greens. Other options for cover crops, cowpea is really good. Any of the peas, beans, peas, or legumes are going to be great. Rattlesnake bean is really good. Kelly and Ryan with Seed the Stars have 4 or 5 different beans that they're trying out this year. They're doing some in our garden at the fort. The cow peas, I think, the beans are really the best. Black-eyed peas are really good to do. What are some other ones that you can think of?
I mean, yeah, I would just do like the cover peas and stuff. I mean, they're not really that tasty, but I mean, if you're still wanting some production, you can do the cover crops with like the peas and then plant something taller like okra or something that would enjoy the summer heat.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I mostly focus on, for those annual beds, just do beans. You want something that's going to fix the nitrogen in your soil, to be honest. And for me personally in Florida, I get overwhelmed with, if the food forest and gardening season were all at the same time, I would never get anything done. I would be so overwhelmed. So I'm glad for us, gardening season is kind of winding down and the food forest season is kind of amping up. So I like to put my garden to bed and do the cover crop of beans and peas. And if I eat them, I eat them. If I don't, I don't. I honestly don't even care that much. I want something to be growing there. Now, if you've got like chickens or something, you could even do wheatgrass, rye, and then feed that to the birds when it's really young. A lot of clovers you could do, like crimson clover, which is the red clover, really pretty bright red clover. Crimson clover is an annual. So you could do a crimson clover cover crop would be really pretty. Or if your nitrogen levels are awesome, which they're not, but if you think they're awesome and you don't want to do beans or you just cannot do beans, do flowers. Do marigolds, do cosmos, do zinnias. Don't do sunflowers because they do have an allelopathic result, but any of those like flowers would be good because then at least you're pollinating, even if you're not fixing nitrogen in the soil, which you should be, then at least you've got something pretty and you're fixing nitrogen.
it's 23 raised beds at heart, 40 feet long a piece.
Oh, yeah, I would. With that size, maybe do a little bit of both. If they're that size raised beds, maybe do like a section of beans and then do some flowers. Do a section of beans, do a section of flowers, because then you've got some beauty. You've got something to enjoy. You could do some amaranth in there. You could do some quinoa. You could do flax. You could do cosmos and zinnias. I already said celosa is a really good one. Yeah, you could do any of those in there.
I mean, honestly, like even just having it as a time for like resting. I mean, most people up north have the winter where they can't grow anything and it's a time of rest. And honestly, for Florida, it's the summer. Yep. You just put your gardens to bed, put something, some sort of cover crop, probably nitrogen fixing. Yep. Gives you that nutrients after the fact, and it gives you time to get away from the beds.
Get away from it.
And keeps you rejuvenated.
What you could even do with that, just to keep it in rest mode, is if you've got a bagging mower and you're just pushing or bagging up your grass clippings, throw the grass clippings on top of it, and then instead of composting in a bin, just lift up the grass clippings, throw your compost stuff underneath, and set it back down, and then come fall, when you're ready to do your fall gardening, then you're good to go with those. So. Alrighty, I think that is all of the questions for this month's Q&A Live. Thanks so much for joining us. So we do these usually the first week of every month. It was a little bit later this month because my family was visiting from Michigan, but you are welcome to rewatch these on YouTube. So those will be available as a backlog. Again, if you are from the Patreon community, thank you so much for your continued support and continually growing, asking questions, learning from one another, the ideas. I've loved seeing the chat increasing there in the Patreon community. So if you are not familiar with Patreon and you're watching, that's a great way to get classes, mentorship, PDFs. It's kind of like doing a permaculture design course, but at your own pace. So we've got about 17 different classes posted, a new class every month, one that's longer and one that's shorter, farm and garden tours, PDF and learning documents to help you develop your own yard, garden, and food forest. And again, if you are in some other spot in the country, or if you're here in Florida, we also do design consultations, both virtually and in person, to help you design your yard, your food forest, and your property, and set you up for success and for abundance. So again, thank you so much for joining. I'll see you soon, and hopefully I will see you in the garden.